Most people don't realize this, but entire flavors once defined childhood in the Netherlands and then quietly disappeared. Not rebranded, not improved, just gone. One day they were everywhere, in school pockets, at fairs, in glass jars on the counter. And the next, no one was selling them anymore. What makes this strange is that these weren't unpopular sweets. Some were so intense they became a kind of rite of passage. Others were messy, physical, even a little uncomfortable to eat. And that might be exactly why they didn't survive. Because as tastes changed and rules tightened, certain candies became too much, too sticky, too hard, too salty, too strange. And instead of being phased out loudly, they faded away while no one was paying attention. What's even wilder is that a few of these treats technically still exist today, but only in altered forms that older fans barely recognize. Different names, different textures, different rules. And once you hear how some of these candies were eaten and why modern stores would never allow it now, you'll understand why they had no chance of surviving the present. Because the first ones to disappear weren't the weakest. They were the most extreme. Some of the first Dutch candies to disappear weren't banned for their flavor. They vanished because of how you were expected to eat them. Take Trekdrop. It wasn't just licorice, it was an experience. Long, chewy strips you pulled apart with your hands, stretched between friends, sometimes even wrapped around fingers before biting in. It was sticky, slow, and completely hands-on. But as candy became cleaner, faster, and individually wrapped, Trekdrop suddenly felt outdated. Too much touching, too much sharing, too little control. Then there was Duimdrop, and this one wouldn't stand a chance today. It came as a soft strip of salty licorice that you pressed onto your thumb and licked until the flavor faded. That was the point. Your thumb became part of the candy. Kids loved it. Parents didn't question it. But modern hygiene standards would shut that down instantly. What once felt playful now looks unthinkable. And if that wasn't physical enough, there were Likkerschepjes, small plastic shells filled with compressed sweet powder, meant to be licked out slowly. Not poured, not bitten. Just repeated contact, again and again, until nothing was left. No wrapper, no barrier. Just a ritual that depended on patience and saliva. None of these sweets disappeared overnight. They were simply replaced by things that were easier to regulate, easier to package, and easier to sell without explanation. But the candies that followed didn't vanish because they were messy. They vanished because they were too much for the human jaw. Not all candies faded quietly. Some held on as long as they could, until people simply stopped wanting the challenge. Kattenkopjes were a perfect example. Small licorice pieces shaped like cat heads. But don't let the size fool you. These things were rock hard. You didn't chew them, you committed to them. Kids would keep one tucked in their cheek for ages, slowly softening it while the flavor punched back harder than expected. For many, it wasn't a treat. It was a test. Weinballen pushed that idea even further. These massive red candy balls weren't meant to be eaten quickly. They lasted for hours, sometimes days. Your jaw got tired long before the candy gave up. They stained tongues, exhausted patience, and turned a sweet into a long-term project. At some point, modern snacks made that kind of effort feel unnecessary. And then there were salmiakbraken. Jagged chunks of salty licorice with no smoothing, no soft edges, and no apology. The flavor hit immediately, sharp, intense, and unapologetically bitter. For fans, that was the appeal. For everyone else, it was overwhelming. As candy trends moved toward smoother textures and gentler flavors, these raw blocks started disappearing from shelves. The problem wasn't quality, it was commitment. Modern candy asks almost nothing from you. These sweets asked everything. And once that shift happened, another category fell out of favor. not because of texture, but because the flavor itself became controversial. Because in the Netherlands, licorice didn't just push boundaries, it crossed them. Dutch licorice has always been intense, but some versions crossed into territory that even loyal fans struggled to defend. Zwart-wit puder was one of them, a black and white salmiak powder sold in small bags, meant to be eaten by dipping a wet finger straight into it. The flavor hit instantly, salty, sharp, and almost medicinal. For some, it was addictive. For others, it felt like a dare. As tastes shifted and eating habits changed, fewer people were willing to explain why they enjoyed something that aggressive. Then there was zoethout, not a candy in the modern sense at all. It was literal licorice root, dry, woody, and bitter, chewed slowly until the flavor released. Older generations swore by it, but younger audiences saw no appeal. It didn't look fun. It didn't feel indulgent. And it definitely didn't compete with brightly colored, sugar-heavy alternatives. What made these treats vulnerable wasn't just the taste, it was perception. Salty licorice started being described as too strong, too strange, or only for real Dutch people. Online, debates popped up about whether younger generations had weaker taste buds, while others argued the candy simply refused to evolve. Sales didn't crash overnight. They thinned out slowly, year by year, until stores stopped making space for them. But some candies didn't disappear because people stopped eating them. They vanished because their names stopped being acceptable. A few Dutch candies didn't disappear because of taste, texture, or effort. They disappeared because their names became a problem. One of the most debated examples is Duimdrop. For decades, it was known as a hard, crumbly sweet made from the byproduct of potato starch production. People remembered the texture more than the flavor. Brittle, chalky, and oddly satisfying. But over time, the name itself became impossible to defend. As awareness changed, manufacturers quietly removed it from packaging. What replaced it depended on who you asked. Some stores began selling something similar under names like Borstoning or Galamas. Others changed the recipe just enough to avoid comparison. That's where the argument started. Older fans claimed the original was gone for good. New buyers insisted it was the same thing in disguise. Because once a candy loses its name, it also loses its identity. Without the original label, memories start clashing with reality. Was the taste actually different? Or did the name change how people experienced it? Unlike other sweets that faded out naturally, this one fractured. It survived in pieces, scattered across brands and regions, never fully reclaiming what it used to be. And while some candies were renamed to survive, others were tied to places that no longer exist in the same way. Because when the setting disappears, the candy usually goes with it. Some candies didn't disappear because anyone rejected them. They disappeared because the places that sold them slowly faded away. Stroopseldatjes were a perfect example. Hard, orange-colored sticks made from cooked sugar syrup, usually sold at fairs and street markets. They weren't fancy. They weren't packaged. You bought them to hold while walking, letting the syrup slowly melt as the crowd moved around you. Once fairs became less common and more regulated, sweets like this had nowhere to live. Kaneelstokken followed the same path. Long, pink and white cinnamon sticks with a sharp, warming bite. They were everywhere at fun fairs, spinning racks, and temporary stalls. But once those stands disappeared, supermarkets had no reason to stock something so specific. Without the atmosphere, the candy lost its purpose. Then there was manna, puffed rice coated in a thin, colorful sugar shell, handed out at children's parties and school events. It wasn't about the flavor. It was about the moment. A bowl on the table, a handful shared with friends. As party culture changed and pre-packaged treats took over, Manna slowly slipped out of rotation. These candies depended on movement, noise, and crowds. They weren't meant for quiet aisles and barcodes. And when the setting vanished, they went with it. But the most overlooked losses weren't tied to flavor or location. They were tied to something far more personal. Some Dutch candies weren't memorable because of how they tasted. They were remembered because of how they felt. Olivellen were simple sugar candies, wrapped in thin paper, usually twisted at the ends. But inside that wrapper was a small surprise. A printed poem, saying, or fortune. Half the fun was unwrapping it carefully, reading the message, and deciding whether to keep it or throw it away. When candy shifted towards sealed plastic and uniform branding, that tiny moment of discovery disappeared. Schuimblokken were just as unassuming. Light foam cubes that dissolved the second they touched your tongue. No crunch, no resistance. They lived in open candy jars, scooped by hand, mixed with other sweets. Once hygiene rules changed and pre-packed bags became the norm, these soft cubes became harder to justify on store shelves. And then there were boterbabbelaars. Hard butterscotch candies from Zealand, often sold in sturdy blue tins. They weren't flashy, but they lasted forever, both in taste and memory. You didn't buy them on impulse. They sat in cupboards, brought out slowly, tied to visits, conversations, and time passing. These candies weren't designed to be rushed. They required patience, touch, and attention, which brings up an uncomfortable question. Did these sweets really disappear? Or did the world simply stop making room for them? When people say these Dutch candies disappeared, that's only half true. Some of them still exist, hidden in specialty shops, renamed on shelves, or recreated in smaller batches that barely resemble the originals. But what actually vanished wasn't just the product. It was the experience around it. The pulling, the licking, the waiting, the paper wrappers, the fairs, the shared rules everyone somehow understood as kids. Modern candy isn't worse. It's just different, faster, cleaner, easier to control. And in that process, the extremes were the first to go. The candies that demanded effort, the ones that shocked your taste buds or made adults raise an eyebrow. What's strange is how quietly it all happened. No announcements, no outrage. Just a gradual replacement until one day, someone tried to explain an old favorite and realized no one else knew what they were talking about. And maybe that's the real reason these sweets feel rare now. Not because they're impossible to make, but because they belong to a version of childhood that doesn't exist anymore. So the next time you walk past a candy aisle and everything feels a little too safe, remember, it wasn't always like this. If you loved this trip down memory lane and want to explore more hidden treasures from Dutch culture, make sure to subscribe to Dear Old Holland. Hit that bell so you never miss a story about the Netherlands' most fascinating traditions, foods, and forgotten favorites. Trust us, you won't want to miss what we uncover next.